You know, I'm not a young man anymore. I'd like to win these fights before I'm gone. I'm Fred Kelly Grant. I've been a lawyer for 50 years. In the East, I prosecuted organized crime. In the West, I represented 2 governors in restraining arbitrary federal regulatory agencies. Today, I protect landowners, private businesses, citizens like you, against a government run amok. I've won against the federal government in California, Arizona, Utah, Texas, Kansas, and Colorado. But today, from the San Juan Islands in the Great Northwest to the Outer Banks of North Carolina, through overregulation and executive orders, under the radar, the federal government is threatening the paper industry, the timber industry, energy industry, transportation, ranching and farming, and the seafood industry of the Chesapeake Bay. Help us take the fight to the government. Help us stand up for the American people. Help us fight the good fight. Help us put the EPA back in the box, the penalty box. I'm Fred Kelly Grant. Thank you.
America is an exceptional nation, built by exceptional people doing exceptional jobs. But now, all across the country, these same people, their careers, and their very way of life are under attack from runaway regulations.
With the regulations that the EPA is putting on all of us, there is no way to manage the forest properly.
But we will be losing our logging industry. It'll be going to China.
We've got a communist country laughing at us.
The state of Colorado made a deal with the ranchers, and the state says it was a good, honest deal, but we don't like it anymore, so give us our money back.
$13 million worth of gravel underneath those acres that we're giving up, and they say it's worth 0.
However, the bureaucrats have forgotten one thing. These are Americans, and Americans never surrender.
I want to be green. I want to save the planet. Loggers today are doing the best job that's ever been done in the woods.
My son was born while I was in Vietnam, and I'm willing to fight some more.
Helen and I love the ranch so much and the family that I think 100% of us are going to be buried on this ranch.
I'm Fred Kelly Grant. I've been a lawyer for 50 years. Today, I protect citizens like you. I've won against the federal government in California, Arizona, Utah, Texas, Kansas, and Colorado.
Against incredible odds and immense pressure, these folks have chosen to stand and fight. Stand and fight with Fred Kelly Grant.
We cannot let this shut America down.
What you saw is some videos that we've made. We've put together a team. It's a very exceptional team. One of the things that people have worried about for some time is the fact that I hadn't prepared anybody to keep going with this. And so an anonymous donor, anonymous to the public in New York City, who had no real dog in any of these fights except that she really abhors the idea of bureaucrats running the government, gave us a substantial amount to begin to put a team of attorneys together and paralegals, and we started the cases that you've seen here on this, and I'll explain a few of them to you, and that's what has made it possible for us to come to the city of Redding to help the city and your coordination committee take on CARB, the California Air Resources Board, with regard to probably the worst regulation that I've ever seen. And I've seen a lot of them over the last 25 years. Before I explain what the city has done this week, in fact, Friday, so last week, I very seldom know what day of the week it is, or as Carol, my wife, will tell you, where we are, what city we're in. At one point during a 48-hour period, we were in Colorado, Kansas, Cleveland, Washington, D.C., and back in Kansas. And that's when I told her I had to have a watch with 4 time zones on it, because that day I was in 4 conference calls, 1 in each of the time zones. She could only find a 3 time zone watch, so I still have to guess as to the 4th. The members of your coordination committee who have worked with the city, these folks have put together a tremendous program for us to take over and work with them. Mark Block, who is has been our chief finance officer of these cases that were up here on the video, and with this one came into town on Saturday, and he remarked to me several times as to how well organized this operation is. And Gary's response is, if you think we're organized now, wait a while. Well, it is the best organization that we've come into in the cases that we have filed. Let me tell you about, first of all, the city of Reading, and the city sent a letter on Friday to the California Air Resources Board that lists all the reasons why they have to follow the law and coordinate with the city. I've been here before. In fact, I think Erin Ryan figured I'd been here 6 times, been on her radio show 6 times, and I think I've been here each time and talked about coordination. All of you, who here has never heard about the process? Okay, you're going to have to, I'm going to have to, give me your email, I'll send it to you by email. Because the rest, I think you fully understand this process. It's one that Congress has mandated that the federal agencies, or any agency that deals in a major federal action, has to follow. And it means that they have to coordinate with the local government. They have to use every practicable means to make their policy consistent with that of the local government. Well, obviously, the policy of the city of Reading is not to require these filters, which are based on absolutely no sound science and without any consideration for the economic havoc and the social havoc that they will create. The letter that the city sent, and I'm sure that it's up on all kinds of websites by now so that you can see it and read it. If you read it, you'll find all the reasons that CARB has violated the law and all the reasons why they have to coordinate with the city. If they don't, they've violated the Interstate Commerce Clause of the Constitution. They've violated the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. They've violated the Due Process Clause of the Constitution. And in so doing, they've violated your 10th Amendment rights under the Constitution. And those 10th Amendment rights, since I was here last, have been extended now even to individual citizens. The Supreme Court, in a 9-0 decision, and you think that's unusual? 9-0, decided for the first time in history that the 10th Amendment can be raised by individual citizens. It's something that many of us had preached for years, and the political scientists said, no. Of the people in the 10th Amendment didn't really mean of the people, to the people. It was just superfluous. And our argument was that the founders of the Constitution were not like today's Congress. They didn't write just to be writing. They didn't write 10,000-page bills. They meant every word that was in the document. And the Supreme Court finally affirmed that position that we had taken. So the city can raise the 10th Amendment in your behalf as individual citizens. And the city, in the position that it's taken to require CARB to coordinate, that action is not limited to just the residents of the city of Reading. Because if the city wins, and what the city has raised is an issue that affects every Californian throughout the state, CARB can't have it 2 ways. They can't have a regulation that violates all those rules and say, okay, in Reading we won't enforce it, but we will in the rest of the state. It doesn't work that way. So one of the questions that was asked on Saturday is, do you have to be a resident? Does this apply only to the residents of Reading? It does not. It applies to everybody in the state of California. But more than that, it applies to everybody in the United States of America, because I guarantee you this: we may not win. I know Gary doesn't like to hear me say that. We may not win. I can tell you that I haven't lost yet in one of these cases. But there will come a time when I do. But if we don't win, they'll know they've been in one hell of a fight. And it'll be so clear that they've been in a fight that I expect that the United States Congress will do something about it. Because one of the goals of this coordination effort is to come up with language that we can get in an appropriations bill that will prohibit the EPA from using any appropriation to assist the implementation of the CARB rule in California in any way, or to fund any implementation of the rule, which would mean no more funding for CARB from EPA. So from that standpoint, we will win. We may not make CARB withdraw the regulation, but we will cause them so much trouble in the District of Columbia that I think that they will think that they wish the city of Reading did not exist. And maybe anything north of Red Bluff. This case will be the frontispiece for all these other cases that you saw up here, and I want to tell you a little about them. Dennis Schoeneck and his son are loggers in Wisconsin. Now, the theory of the EPA in requiring a change in all the boilers that are coal-fired in Wisconsin and Michigan is that it's necessary to clean the air, that the loggers and the paper mills are ruining the air. Those counties in the north woods of Wisconsin have, under every standard that we could find, the cleanest air in the United States. Dennis won a global environmental award. He's won the world title in environment as an environmental logger. He's raising his family to log, and as you heard him say in the video, he wants to save the planet. The most returnable resource is a tree. You cut a tree down in order to have one grow. And one of the things that we were able to show in the hearing that we held there, the public hearing, as you will have here in June, is that by not managing the forests, the National Forest Service is contributing more carbon dioxide into the air than all man-made emissions put together. In last year's fires, forest fires in Idaho, more carbon dioxide went into the air in a few weeks from the forest fires than all man-made emissions in the state for the complete year. That's from forest fires. We also produced evidence that shows that the dead and dying wood in the forests, which the Forest Service won't allow to be cleared, puts more carbon dioxide into the air than man-made emissions. And so one of the things that we will ask in the findings that are coming out in a couple of weeks in Wisconsin, we're going to petition the EPA to regulate the Forest Service, because the United States government is violating the Clean Air Act by not managing the forests. The other thing that we produced in that hearing, quite by accident, we asked for witnesses to show the impact of the loss of logging on law enforcement services. And a deputy sheriff came in and testified about how a cartel from Mexico had taken over the national forest in that county. And a picnicker stumbled on this strange entryway into the forest that nobody can go into because it's too tangled. As a matter of fact, the deputy said that anytime he goes into the forest, he has to strap on, I think it's 120 pounds of extra equipment just in case he runs into a booby trap, because the cartels are using every one of our national forests as a site for growing marijuana, producing it and taking it down to Mexico. In that county, they made one arrest, one seizure of 75,000 plants. And I've forgotten what the dollar value on the street was. It was in the millions of dollars. When they arrested the members who were brought in to farm this right in the middle of the forest, they were willing to talk to the officers, and the officers said, "Why are you so willing to tell us these things?" And they said, "Because our family's already dead. When you caught us, our families will be dead." And they were able to trace beheadings of wives and children in Mexico to this particular cartel in Wisconsin. It started us looking at the other national forests, and it's going on in virtually every national forest. Booby traps are set. These people are so blatant that they use the Freedom of Information Act to get information from the Forest Service to know where to go in order to be safe from any kind of management influence or any kind of management intrusion. And so we're going to ask the Department of Justice to investigate the Forest Service for creating an unsafe, unlawful danger to the people of Wisconsin. When those findings come out, I expect that in D.C. they will always remember that there is a Rhinelander, Wisconsin, too, just as they will the city of Reading. Denny Olsen, you saw, he talked about being in Vietnam. And he was moved to tears as he said, "You know, I went off and fought for my country in Vietnam. Basically, I never thought I'd have to fight for my livelihood, but I'm willing to fight. If I fought there, I can fight here for our liberty." And Denny, to be moved to tears that way, Denny's a crusty old guy. We saw the same thing in Maryland, where the EPA is trying to stop crabbing and oystering. Because after all, since they've done it since 1620, there must be something wrong with it. They must be hurting the bay in some way. It's combined with actions by the legislature of Maryland and the governor of Maryland, who have imposed a rain tax on some of the rural counties, not all, just those where they don't want any development. And so they've imposed a more severe tax to keep business out of them. We filed a lawsuit, this same team that I'm talking about that we're going to bring here. We filed a lawsuit against the Department of Natural Resources and the Department of Environment in Maryland. The first time a lawsuit ever was won, we won. First time a lawsuit ever was won against either of those departments. And as we filed it, the day we filed it, and Carol and I were walking along with these fishermen. Here's Captain Rob, who has his own little crab boat. And again, crusty. I mean, just what you would think of as a Chesapeake Bay fisherman, whose family has been there for 4 generations. And he said, "This morning I thank God. I have prayed for 20 years that somebody would come and take our case to help protect our livelihood and keep our fishing going in this bay." And he started crying. And he looked at me and he said, "God answered my prayer when you came." Well, it wasn't me, it's the team of committed people that are working with me for far less money than they could make outside. Bob Emick, you saw. Bob is the head of the family of Emicks in Colorado, who, because of EPA regulations and other influences, the state of Colorado took donations of conservation easements from these folks. They all took tax credits. They took the cash. They used it to buy equipment and to restock their land. All of them used it to pay down loans and to buy more stock. And then the state decided that they were worth zero value. And they owed $1.5 million back taxes plus penalties and interest. We went in there, and as Bob said there, they aren't going to beat us. We're going to be buried on this land. Well, in some ways they did beat them, because finally they came out with a settlement offer that they settled for $500,000, and they waived the penalty, which was over $1 million, and so they didn't get their day in court, and we didn't get to beat them, but we would have. Gary Edinger was the next person up here, the one-legged logger, the most amazing man I think I've ever seen in my life. His leg got cut off as he was logging in Wisconsin. He's one of those independent loggers that would be put out of business instantly if this boiler rule goes through. And he said that the only thing he could think of, he said, I must be crazy, the only thing I could think about in the hospital is, how am I going to log with one leg? How am I going to go back and get that tree? And he said that he called the tree a widowmaker, and he said, I knew I had to go back and get the tree. He did. Wes McKinley is the legislator in Colorado that tried desperately to help those ranchers. And as he told you, the state just simply breached their contract with the ranchers, which is what every federal agency and state agency tries to do once they've made an agreement. Well, what do we do in Redding? You've read the letter. You know that the City Council has called on CARB to come and meet with them and coordinate. Whether they do or not, I have no idea. I have a guess, but I have no idea. I know that this is too important to the state of California to let go. They want trucks off the road. They want to force you into cities. Every one of the EPA rules is designed to get people out of the country and into the cities. I hate to mention the terrible words, but it's Agenda 21, pure and simple. But we don't call it that, because if we do, we're kooks. We're constitutional kooks. So we simply say that it is a revenue-raising mission to get people out of the rural areas for control of land and water. California, in this case, wrote the standard, and EPA adopted it. California led the race in this case. And you can be sure that the rest of the states are watching what happens here, because New York and Massachusetts and Maryland and Michigan and all the other liberal states up and down the East Coast and through the Midwest, all 12 cities that elected the last president, will be watching to see whether or not you succumb. Because if you do, the CARB regulation will become the regulation of every state. And EPA now has adopted it, and so they will force it. Today, the committee decided on a date to recommend for the scheduled public hearing that we'll hold. A public hearing as we've held in each of these cases. We held it in Wisconsin, Michigan. We held one in Kansas with regard to the lesser prairie chicken, which, if they list that as a threatened species, will threaten every farmer in Kansas. We used the public hearing with regard to the withdrawal of the uranium lands in northern Arizona, and we'll use it here. The purpose of that public hearing is to make a record of the economic damage that is done by this regulation, which the agency pays no attention to. The social damage that will occur as a result of the economic damage, because when a trucker goes out of business, for example, it isn't just the trucker that's impacted. It's the barber that cut his hair. It's the waitress that served him coffee. It's the school district where his children went. There's nothing that happens, there's nothing that CARB does or any other agency, there's nothing they do that doesn't affect the entire structure of your society. And that's the reason Senator Packwood put that local government rule in the statute in 1976 to make sure that the federal agencies couldn't run roughshod over local government, because it's at the local government level where you're served. I mean, you can find Gary Cadd in a supermarket or in a drugstore or on the street, and you can yell at him. But you can't find your senator on the street. And if you did, it wouldn't do any good because she wouldn't listen to you. I remember a few years ago when I was in Del Norte County, they asked me, they said, when you talk to Senator Feinstein, and I was going before their committee, would you remind her that we're in California? Because she had apparently at some speech or something had cut California off just below Del Norte County and had included that as in Oregon. Local government at that public hearing with testimony, not just talk, but testimony, will prove many things. First of all, the economic damage. They'll also prove the lack of science, the lack of sound science to support this rule. We know that the science that has been used does not meet the standards of the Data Quality Act, which Congress has passed. It's not relevant, it's not objective, it's not timely, and it just plain ain't sound. It's just that simple. And we have experts to say that. We have a professor, a former professor from UCLA, who blew the whistle on a lot of these things and got in trouble for it. We have a lawyer who worked for EPA for 20 years and knows how these regulations are founded. And he will testify as to how they, first of all, decide what do they want to do, and then they write the regulation to do that, and then they go and try to find something to support the regulation. And it's that way in his testimony. It has been that way with every rule and regulation that he worked on in the 20 years that he was with EPA. We also will have an expert to testify that when you talk about a clean community, these agencies talk about a clean community from the standpoint of air quality. And so they come up with a regulation that will not really improve air quality, but it looks like it will. And they justify it on the basis that it's for the health of the community. The expert will testify that 40% of what goes into the health of a community is unemployment, poverty, stress. Those things cause a community to be unhealthy. And some of the counties in the nation where these departments of environmental quality call the cleanest communities, he rates as the most unhealthy. So instead of dealing truly with the public health, they deal with what they want to deal with. They don't want to deal with unemployment, and the rule that they've imposed to implement with regard to the filters and air quality will contribute to the unhealthy status of the community by creating more unemployment, by putting more stress on the citizens and more stress on your social and cultural system. We'll produce evidence as to each element of the human environment. If you were to read every document that CARB has issued, and I haven't, but I have read the ones they say are important, the human environment, that term is never used. When they wrote their first report as they started to write the regulation, they said that when they identified diesel as a toxic, there was no economic impact, so they didn't have to study the economic impact. Well, of course there was. It wasn't an impotent action. They knew when they listed it as a toxic, they knew exactly what would come. It had to be resolved. It had to be put out of existence. So of course there was going to be economic impact, but they didn't study it because they knew that the economic impact was going to outweigh any possible health benefit that they could claim. In Wisconsin, and we will here, we'll produce the same kind of evidence. In Wisconsin, we were able to show that the EPA rule to filter particulates out of the air, just as the CARB rule, that if it would have any benefit at all from a health standpoint, it might eliminate 8 hours in a doctor's office for one person over the next 11 years. 8 hours, and the impact is to eliminate logging, to eliminate the paper companies, because those paper companies all testified they would have to move to China. Now let me ask you this question. If CARB is really interested in climate warming, and if they're really interested in air quality, what have they contributed to air quality if they drive truckers out of California to Nevada or to some other state and they continue using these filters that they claim dirty the air? Do they think California is the only source of this? We asked the question in Wisconsin, do you think you've bettered global climate warming by forcing the paper companies to go to China where there's no regulation at all? And as a matter of fact, Dennis Schoeneck, in one portion of his testimony and on the video, asks the question, would you rather live in China or in Rhinelander, Wisconsin? And I don't think there's much question. He asked the question, would you rather live in the District of Columbia with the clean air there where EPA's offices are, or in Wisconsin? Well, the same applies with CARB. I know that you feel that CARB, that this may be a unique case and it may be so difficult that perhaps we will have more trouble with it than the other cases, and we might. But it isn't unique. This is going on all over the country. EPA has set out to destroy industry in rural America. CARB's rule is doing just that. The big companies that can afford to be in compliance are not going to be found mostly in Shasta County and in Northern California. They're going to be found mostly in the urban areas of Southern California. And so what have they accomplished with their rule? Do you think the air in Los Angeles is cleaner than the air here because they've changed filters on the big company trucks down there? They have a study out that shows that portions of Los Angeles are the cleanest communities and the healthiest communities in the state, with all those freeways going through there. You see, they'll do anything and say anything to support their position because, as the lawyer will tell us as a witness, they decide on the position, they decide what they want to happen, they decide how they can make it happen, and then they try to find something to justify it. And what we're going to do is penetrate to that they've tried to find to justify it and show that it doesn't justify it, that they have violated the Interstate Commerce Clause, the 10th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause, due process of law, as well as the Data Quality Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, and the Clean Air Act. And as such, they ought to pay the price, because I doubt that there's a citizen in this room tonight that could violate all of those statutes and still be considered in good standing in the state of California. So that's where we are. That's what we can make happen. After the public hearing, the record of that public hearing, which will then be not just position, not opinions, but testimony, admissible evidence, we will send to every member of the Appropriations Committee of the Congress. We'll ask Representative Simpson, who's the chairman of the Subcommittee of Appropriations for EPA, to submit language in the next appropriations bill that will prohibit any use of appropriations to assist implementation of the California rule or the EPA rule based on the California rule. And in that way, hopefully, we can bring a stop to it while all the cases work their way through the courts. The committee's going to call on you for help. They're going to call on you for financial help, because the lawyers that I bring in, even me myself, we unfortunately can't work free anymore. The paralegals that we bring in, we have 2 historians from Manhattan who are in their 80s. They have written histories. I'd ask you to look them up. Deborah and Gerald Strober, S-T-R-O-B-E-R. They are chronicling all of these cases, and they will be here documenting this one. They've done the history of Queen Elizabeth. They traveled to Mozambique with the Queen and her entourage. They've done a history of the Kennedys, of one of the Dalai Lamas, and they've got a bookshelf full of their histories. And as they left the Emick family ranches in Colorado and drove back to Denver with me, they said, you know, Jerry said, this has changed our lives forever. And I said, what do you mean? And Deborah says, well, we've been talking about it. We have always written histories about the powerful. And this is the first time we've really gone out and looked at the people, the real people of America. And Jerry said, you know, as long as we can find people in this country like the Emicks, there's hope for the country. Well, the Emicks are like you folks in this room, and they're like the members of your committee. They're Americans. And as you heard in there, that's what the bureaucrats have forgotten. This is America. In 1775, the Revolutionary War did not begin at Concord and Lexington. The first battle of the Revolution was between farmers and the redcoats in the rural farm country way outside of Boston. Concord and Lexington was an urban area. The very first fight came when the farmers refused to follow the stamp tax. And the redcoats went out, a brigade of them went out to enforce it, and the farmers met them on the highway with sticks and rocks and pitchforks. And rather than get into a shooting match of shooting down unarmed people, the British leader decided to retreat, and he did. So the first battle of the Revolution was won by rural people, armed with not a single weapon that would have been of effect against the British Army. That's where we've come today. That war started because of bureaucrats, not because of King George. He's a symbol. But the bureaucrats, the tax assessors, the port authorities, the customs officers, they were what caused the distress to the colonists. And we've come 360 degrees back to the same place. The bureaucrats are running this country, or so they think. And we have to change that. And I'm very proud that if you go on the Stand and Fight Club website, you'll see, at least by tomorrow or the next day, you'll see mention of the SAFE team, S-A-F-E, and that's the Save American Free Enterprise team of our historians, our filmmaker from Southern California who made these videos, the lawyers who are working for people like you in the other states, the paralegals that I'm training, and Carol and I. A mighty army we are, 9 of us. And that's better than it was when I met at the table with the lady in New York, and her fabulously wealthy father said, how many feet on the ground do you have to be winning these cases? And I said 2. And he said, you mean you only have 2 assistants? And Mark Block spoke up and said, he means he only has his 2 feet. Well, we've gone 9 times better than that now. And before we're finished here, I hope to have a lot more of you ready to understand coordination, ready to, in fact, I'm going to present a workshop here for 3 days on intensive strategy and how to make it work against the agencies. I'm going to take every case that I've won, 108 of them, and lumping some together, of course, and tell you the strategy that I used in each one, why I used it when I did, and how I managed to get ahead of the agency. And one of the things that I've said here before is that my experience in organized crime was helpful, very helpful, because there's not a lot of difference between the way the bureaucrats function and organized crime. There's no creativity and no imagination by the people on the ground. The policy is made above, and they either follow that policy or they get transferred. And the organized crime that I dealt with, they either followed it or they disappeared. These folks just get transferred somewhere else, and you never get rid of them. They stay there. The staff stays there, and they just keep fulminating these rules and regulations. I promise you this, if the funding comes through that I can bring that whole team here, you'll know we've been here. CARB will know we've been here. And if we get just a little bit of luck, we'll win this thing right here in Reading instead of in D.C. in the Congress. But we will win somewhere.